Hi, I'm Chris Fry, and this is The View from Peru, a podcast about real missionaries telling real stories about real ministry, all from my point of view down here in Lima, Peru. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited to share with you guys about how God took me as from someone who at near the end of high school didn't really want to be a missionary, wasn't really no opinion about it, positive or negative, and definitely someone who never saw himself becoming a teacher, into my current job as a missionary here in Peru at a Christian school as an English and Bible teacher. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope that this is a spiritual benefit to you and that God is glorified through the podcast today. All right, so first up, I just wanted to give you guys a quick Corona versus Peru update. So, last week it was announced that from here on out, men are only allowed to go out unless they have one of like the 5 approved jobs that are allowed to remain open, which would be people working in groceries, like communications, Wi-Fi, news, police, hospital, 1 or 2 other smaller ones like that, but basically the essentials. So unless you have those jobs, only men are allowed to go out on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And they're only allowed to go to banks and groceries. Only women are allowed to go out on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. And once again, only for banking and grocery shopping. Apparently the lines were a lot larger the first Saturday of this announcement than they were the Friday of this announcement, which I thought was pretty interesting. And no one is really allowed to go out on Sundays unless you have one of those very few select jobs. And while the president hasn't officially declared it, other department heads have pretty much said that we all should be expecting these rules to stay until around May 5th. Schools will probably remain closed until around then. I will continue to be an online teacher until May 5th. But hopefully at that time, it will actually be over and all the quarantine and the martial law will be lifted. Also, they have been calling in retired military and police and doctors and nurses, as in many countries, just trying to really get this thing under control and really parole the streets. Well, Lima, the city, and the province are doing well. Some other provinces in Peru have not taken this martial law seriously, and now the police and the military are being called out into those provinces more, and they're really laying down the law there. Please keep Peru in your prayers, as many Peruvians live on a daily wage. They go, they work, they get paid that day, they go back home, they buy the food for that supper, and then breakfast and lunch the next morning, and they keep that very close cycle. So please continue to pray for Peru. On other news, I preached this morning. It was an interesting experience preaching in my living room. I actually did wear pants, not even shorts, real pants. So, first time in a couple weeks. Felt weird. But the preaching felt good. Even though I couldn't see anyone, which was kind of weird. Even my wife was watching upstairs. So I was really just talking to a phone. It was a good experience, and just hopefully God is glorified through what was said, and that it was of benefit to our local church community here in New Life, Lima. Iglesia Nueva Vida. Also, Monday, I start spring break. My wife and I had to cancel our original plans for spring break, which was going to be celebrating our 2-year anniversary a little bit later and going to somewhere just outside of the city. However, obviously those have been canceled, as most people's plans have had to been canceled. But yeah, we look forward to not having any work to do and a lot of time to just hang out with each other and get a lot of personal projects done. So spring break still should be a pretty good, relaxing time. So from here, I would like to transition into the main segment of this podcast, how God got me back to Peru as an adult missionary instead of just growing up here as a missionary kid. So growing up, unlike many of my fellow missionary kids that I grew up with, I actually had no desire to be a missionary. A lot of my friends grew up with the mindset that they wanted to be a missionary, and even specifically that they wanted to come back to Peru as missionaries. And for me, that just never really seemed in the books. I don't think I was rebelling against God in like a Jonah type way. I just didn't really see what I had to offer. I just didn't really see it matching up with the talents and the gifts and the interests God gave me. However, the first time that really began to change was in between my 11th and 12th grade year of high school. See, my family went to the States for my 11th grade year, and we were on furlough. And at the end of our furlough, Baptist Mid Missions, my parents' mission organization, had a conference. And it was a really cool experience because what they would do is, for basically like the elementary kids, they had a vacation Bible school program. But for like the older kids, they took us around to different parts of the city that we were in. We went to Six Flags one day, or Great America, or are those the same? Anywho, we went and rode a whole lot of roller coasters one day. I think there was a water park another day. They really made it fun for us in the days. Then in the evenings, we would get back together for like the service with our parents. And one of those services was a missionary from England telling us about what his work in England looked like. And this was really like the first time I began to think about missions outside of Peru or outside of Latin America. And I already had a deep fascination with England due to my love of reading Lord of the Rings and C.S. Lewis. So he automatically had my attention. And what he shared just really opened up my eyes to missions outside of South America. And I began to think, well, I think I could do that. It was really surprising to me that less than 5% of the UK called themselves religious. Gospel-centered Christianity was only in like the 1 or 2% margins, if that. And that just really blew me away. So I began to think that maybe I should be a missionary in England. And that's really the trajectory that I chose my college with. As I mentioned last podcast, I had a deep love for videos and filmography. And so I looked around, and the college that was close to my mom's side of the family and was in the right price range and had a media program also had a youth pastoral program. So I decided I would go to that college. And when I got there, I realized that my love for media would probably stay at the level of a hobby. It was a little bit more intense than what I knew. But hey, that's what you go to college for, right? However, the youth pastor stuff I really began to love. But I did have some conflicts. I don't want to get into a lot of details, but I did have some conflicts with some of the people in charge of the college. Not even the faculty. I loved a lot of my teachers, if not all my teachers. I mean, like the dean and the president and many of us, even some of the professors I would later find out, and many of the students just had conflicting views with like people that were on the level of like the dean and like the board and the committee and the president about the difference between being conservative and being, well, legalistic. And it got to the point where I felt, after a lot of time in prayer and talking to my brother and my parents about this, that I should really think about leaving. And I hadn't really made a decision when I left my sophomore year, but it was definitely in the back of my mind. So in between my sophomore and junior year, I was blessed with the opportunity to serve at Central Baptist Church in Hobart, Indiana, which has now been adopted by Bethel Church and Ministries. And I was able to serve there as an intern youth pastor. And it was a great experience, and I really loved it. I loved working with the kids, many of them who I knew when they were in middle school and they were now teenagers. I loved working with the people that were the youth leaders, even when I was there in high school. Now we were working alongside each other, and it was a great experience. Due to there not being an official on-staff youth pastor at that time, I actually had the youth pastoral office to myself, which was really awesome. Just kind of mind-blowing that, to have your own office right out of your sophomore year of college. It was great. And during that summer, I'd been praying a lot and not really getting any answers about what to do or where to go. And I just remember one morning just thinking and realizing that the position I had as an intern was exactly just that, an internship. And I began having all these flashbacks of people I would meet like at Best Buy or other places like that who had a youth pastoral degree, but due to the churches not being able to, or even sometimes not wanting to pay a full salary, they ended up having to get side jobs. I was like, man, for me, I would rather get a degree in something that I could work full time and then find ways to fit in youth ministry unofficially. If all the data I'm seeing is that most youth pastors don't make money from being a youth pastor, then maybe I should get a degree in something that makes some money, and then I could just be a youth pastor for free. And in that same thought conversation, I realized that one of the classes that I took last semester was Foundations of Education, because in the youth pastoral program, they realized that a lot of youth pastors ended up teaching one or two classes at a local Christian school, so every youth pastor was required to take one class of Foundations of Education. And to my surprise, I really liked it. Out of my smaller study group that was for that class, I was the one that was enjoying that class probably the most. And it was then that I realized that, maybe being a teacher wouldn't be so bad. Maybe being a teacher would be significantly different than being a student. And then I realized, well, if I'm a teacher, maybe I could help students not feel the same way about school that I felt. I was like, maybe I really should be a teacher, but what would I teach? Well, definitely not math. That one was rolled out instantaneously. And then I realized I've always loved stories in general, no matter where they were from, whether they were from movies or TV or short stories or novels or poems, just wherever there was a good story, I was down. Then I got to thinking, well, wouldn't it actually be kind of cool to share that love with teenagers and then be able to be part of their lives 5 days out of the week instead of just 2? And that's really the thought line that led me to changing my degree to being a teacher. And at this time, my goal was never to actually be primarily a teacher. I was just going to teach until I could become a youth pastor. And then if I needed some supplemental income, I was thinking, well, I could do substitute teaching or teach just a couple of hours a week and then really dedicate my time to being a youth pastor. Then I realized, well, if I'm going to change my major, I'm going to lose the large scholarship that my college offers to everyone in their pastoral programs. And I'm not really enjoying it there. I'm not really feeling at peace about being there. So maybe I'll transfer as well. And so one mid-morning between my sophomore and junior year, I decided that's what I was going to do. And I ended up transferring to Baptist Bible College, now Clark Summit University. As soon as I arrived, I just had an overwhelming peace from God that I had made the right decision. And I love the 2.5 years that I spent at Clark Summit University. I'm so grateful to God for the friends that I made there, the faculty, the staff, the president. and everything else. It was an amazing time. And everyone who goes to Clark Summit University actually ends up double majoring. You major in, your normal major, whatever that would be, communications, or in my case, education, and you also major in doctrine. So my full degree is secondary English education and biblical theology. And I didn't realize how perfectly God was setting me up for my current position. However, by the time I was approaching graduation, I was really beginning to think that actually there's a lot of good that can be done as a teacher. And while I still definitely wanted to serve in the church and even take on a youth pastoral position if that ever came my way, I had gotten to the point of complete contentment, and even more than contentment, joy, excitedness about being a full-time English teacher. And I really didn't care if it was at a Christian school or a public school, because I realized that God can use me wherever to help impact the lives of teenagers for him. And also, at a public school, not only would I be able to witness to teenagers and speak into their lives on occasion, but also to my coworkers. However, that began to change again, and for the third time, in Christmas break of 2014. Now, due to transferring colleges and also changing my major, I was put behind about a year. However, thankfully, I was able to take some online classes, and for some semesters, I was able to take the maximum amount of credits. So I was able to take that year and smash it down to about a semester. And that meant that I was graduating on the off semester, right? The Christmas of 2014, I had already finished college, but I hadn't walked and I hadn't had the graduation ceremony. That was going to happen on May 2015. However, I did have a good month to be able to go down to Peru and visit my parents. Now, a month or two before I went down to Peru to visit my parents, I began texting an old friend of mine from Peru. She was also studying education, more specifically special needs education, and she was about to enter her practicum semester as I was leaving mine. And so this gave me a great opportunity to actually be interesting and to have some really cool educational insights and actually being able to carry on a really good, interesting conversation with her for one of the first time in years. And she was also very pretty. Now, we had grown up together. Her parents were some of my parents' first friends when they came to Peru back in the early 80s. So we had always known each other, but nothing had ever really happened. We would go to the same Christian pastor kid camps, and oftentimes church youth groups would have events, and we would end up meeting up there. And, every now and again, my parents would invite her family over for dinner and vice versa. And I've always thought she was attractive, but nothing really seemed to happen. There wasn't really any chemistry growing up between us. However, there was one time, my senior year of high school, that Orison's church began to come down to Peru on a yearly basis to do missions work. And it was a really cool setup, because what would happen is my parents would organize with another church here in Peru and with Origin's church from Cincinnati, Ohio, and those three different groups would organize and work together to serve Peru. And they would do about every other year. 1 year in Lima, Peru, another year up in the mountains, the Andes Mountains. And it was actually during my senior year that I remember seeing this old friend whose name is Paola. And it's being like, man, I haven't seen her in a few years, and she's looking pretty cute. And also, her love for God is just shining out like nothing else during this missions trip. Man, I should ask her out on a date. We should get coffee. Nah, what's really the point? I'm going to leave to go to college in the States in like 3 months. So I ended up not doing anything. But that memory has stayed in my brain. Didn't really act on it too much. We would talk every now and again. But nothing really happened until 4 years later, 2014, same missions trip, only this time in the mountains. And we end up going on the same missions trip again. And all before that, that was going to be the last week of my trip. So we had about 3 weeks before that trip where we ended up just asking each other to hang out. For example, I had a wedding to go to, so I took her as my date. We weren't dating, but she didn't have anything else going on that Saturday, and I thought it'd be a good way to basically kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Meet up with an old friend who also happens to be pretty attractive, and go to this wedding. And then she asked me to go to her church's Christmas pageant, so that was pretty fun. Got to hang out with a lot of other people that I knew from her church. And then, we ended up just getting coffee, just the 2 of us one day. And then I was like, hey, I still want to go to this one place in Lima, and I don't really remember how to get there. Would you mind showing me how to get there again and, just hang out the 2 of us? And she was down for that. And granted, none of these were actually dates. We were just hanging out, quote unquote. So right before that missions trip, it was becoming very obvious what was happening. And I just assumed Paola saw me as a friend. And I just remember thinking to myself, I'm not going to say anything because there's a high probability that such an awesome, godly, attractive girl like her is just going to see me as a friend, and that this hanging out is really just that. And I don't want to go up into the mountains, into the beautiful valley of Huaraz, and there be awkwardness between us when I just asked her to date me and she just shut me down. However, literally like 2 days before that, we were hanging out again. She just straight up asked me, so Chris, what exactly are we doing here? I was like, well, just hanging out, I guess. But I think you're pretty awesome and gorgeous and godly, and I would love to date you, but I don't know how you're feeling about that. So, no pressure. If you don't want that, we can just be friends. It's like, no, that's pretty much what I want too. And yeah, that's pretty much when we started dating. And while we were on the trip, and this is really what sold me on her, like hardcore, right? I realized that this was some next level stuff, not just a casual dating or anything like that, was when we were out there in the boonies of the Andes Mountains, miles away from a hospital or anything like that. I got super sick. Like, I pretty much had to stay in my room for like 4 days. Couldn't get up, couldn't walk, could barely eat, was losing everything that I tried to drink or eat. And she would still come and hang out with me. And I don't know how far she had to walk to find it, but she was able to find me Gatorade and bring it to me. And I was like, man, this girl is next level. Whatever this is very different from any of the girls that I talked with or hung out with in college. This is like real dating. So a few months after that experience, I began looking for a job in Peru. I had taken a job in Indiana, and the more and more we dated, the more and more I realized that I needed to go back down to Peru and spend some time living close to each other. We had only really dated for like a week on a missions trip. Everything else had been long distance. And the more we hung out, the more we prayed about it, I began to realize that I needed to go to Peru for a couple of years and really get to know her and her family and pray about where this was going. And that's what I did. I was able, by the grace of God, to find the job that I have now here at International Christian School of Lima. And when I came down here, I was under the mindset that it was a 2-year contract. So we were going to spend 2 years, get married, and then move back to the States. And I was going to go with that plan I had previously of teaching English in the States. And while we were dating, Paula also wanted to be a missionary in the jungle. So here we have a couple with two very different views about their future. And really, there wasn't like any one moment. And when Paula comes on the podcast at some point in the future, I would like her to tell her story about how God changed her mind and showed her that it was okay to live and serve in Lima. But through prayer and really talking to wise counsel like pastors and our parents and other people, we began to just feel that God wanted us together. And then we realized that the ministries we had wound up doing in Lima were great, and we were very specifically suited for them. And so through prayer, God brought us both to a place of really acceptance of having us serve Him here in Lima, Peru. And just by step, God has brought me to where I am today. I think it would have been overwhelming if God would have called me to Lima, Peru all at once, especially to be an English teacher, especially doing almost the identical stuff my dad is doing. I probably would have told God, that is really corny, and that's not for me. No, you got the wrong guy. However, God in His wisdom, and maybe due to my thick skull, brought me through it step by step, showing me little by little His plan. And that is how God got me here. While there were some giant light bulb moments, Lord calling moments, like when I felt like I should transfer colleges and change my major, most of it has really just happened day to day. Most of the Lord's calling in our lives, I think, happens gradually. I think He knows how much information we could take at once. And He tends to update us just when we need to know it. Doesn't really tell us too early or tell us too late. But when we're in good communication with Him, I mean, not even good, like halfway decent communication with Him sometimes, He does reveal His plans. He is a lamp unto our feet. It's not always a gigantic light that illuminates, the entire path, but just enough to take one or two steps and follow Him. And that is how God got me here. Just baby step after baby step after baby step, just helping me every day wake up and obey Him a little better than the day before. All right, question time. Some people have been sending me questions. I love it. This is a really fun aspect of this podcast. I think I enjoy answering these questions. If you have a question that you would like me to answer about Peru or missions or ministry or as a missionary kid, whatever the case may be, please send them to my email at cmfrey, F-R-E-Y, 427 at gmail.com. cmfrey 427 at gmail.com. Or hit us up on Facebook and or Instagram, Chris and Paula Fry, The View from Peru. You can find us on that as well. All right, so I believe it was Neil who asked, what are some of the blessings and challenges of intercultural marriage? This is a good one. I think it would be fun to spend maybe even an entire podcast talking about intercultural relationships and how that works out. I think that'd be good. Let me know if that would be something you'd be interested in. But just quickly, some of the blessings of intercultural marriage would be that it really helps you understand the other's culture, right? You can study Peruvian culture for 25 years, and it is not going to be the same as actually being part of a Peruvian family. Please don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying I am now an expert on Peruvian culture or anything like that. That is not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is it gives you a different view, a different vibe, a different familiarity with the culture when you are married to someone from that culture. I by no means understand everything about the Peruvian way of life, but I do think it has really helped me grow in my understanding and really understand how and why this country operates the way that it does. And I have so much more to learn, and Paola has been really patient, and I by no means consider myself an expert, but I do think that being married gives you a unique vantage point or even advantage. Also, I would say one of the big benefits is you get to pick and choose the best parts of both cultures, or even doubling up. So for example, Christmas. For Christmas, we actually get to celebrate it two different ways. We get to have a Peruvian Christmas and an American Christmas. And so we both win, right? We get to have two Christmases, and that's pretty awesome. Like, there's really no downside to that. And we're even luckier than normal, maybe, because Peru tends to celebrate Christmas Eve starting around 11 o'clock and then to about 2 or 3 a.m. Christmas Day. So what we do is we go to Paola's family and we have a lot of fun. You know, we eat the main meal at around midnight, and then we hang out and do fireworks and everything like that. And then we go home and sleep at around 3 or 4 o'clock. And then we wake up mid-morning. We have Christmas, the two of us. And then we go to my parents' place and have Christmas with them and usually some other missionaries. And we have an American style Christmas. So no one really loses anything. We gain an extra Christmas. And I think that's awesome. Now, some of the challenges would definitely be communication. No matter how fluent we both get in the other's language, there's always going to be a slight communication barrier. Now, that can be dealt with, that can be minimized, but that is always going to be a part of it, right? And I think really there is always a communication issue in marriages. I don't think that's something that's just unique to intercultural marriages, but I think it might be amplified a bit when there are two literally different languages being thought in the couple's brains. Also, another difficulty or challenge would be to always be remembering the other person's cultural foundations. You know, just making sure that you are always remembering their point of view and where they are coming from. And another challenge, and this isn't a challenge in the sense of it being bad, it's just something that you have to make sure that you're doing. And again, I don't think it's unique to intercultural marriages. I think every family and couple has to deal with this to some degree. But again, intercultural marriages tend to have a different viewpoint or an amplified challenge with it, would be making sure that the other feels that things are fair, right? And this could be anything from holidays, making sure that your husband or your wife feels that you are respecting and celebrating enough of their holidays and that they are doing the same for you. So making sure, so for Paola, that might be remembering 4th of July is a big deal for my family. And if it wasn't for maybe a movie or something or being married to me, she would maybe never know about our Independence Day. Why would she? However, now that we are married, that is something that might be a challenge for her to remember come late June. Oh yeah, we have a thing on the 4th, right? Likewise for me, on Peru's Independence Day, July 28th, or any other holiday that isn't overlapped in both cultures. You know, same thing with time with family, right? Making sure that her opinion about how much family time is needed is being met, and her understanding that my family might not need as much and that is okay, right? So just balancing all of that. Another one that probably is unique to intercultural couples would be the ratio of English-Spanish TV. Making sure that I am not being a TV hog, point blank, but also that she's just not watching stuff in English. I need to make sure that I'm sharing the languages that are being spoken on TV. And also meals, right? Making sure that we both have that balance of appreciating the other's country's meals, right? That we're not having too much Peruvian food and that I'm getting upset about just eating American food or haven't had whatever in such a long time. And also the other way, right? Making sure that, oh yeah, she has had her pollo a la brasa or ají de la huancaína or whatever. Just making sure that that everyone is comfortable with the meal ratio that has gone on over the last week or two. Now, in our personal experience, due to really God's grace and premarital counseling, none of these have really been a big issue, but they are definitely challenges that might look differently for an international or intercultural couple. All right. And so for the second and last question for the podcast, what could the global church learn from Peru? I think one of the things that many churches around the world, or maybe specifically the United States, can learn from Peru is there is nothing wrong with keeping it simple. You do not need to know all the latest worship songs, and you do not need to have a 7-person contemporary worship band, and you do not need to have 4 projectors and the best PowerPoint. There is nothing wrong with keeping it simple. The reason why we go to church or why we have sermons is to hear the gospel. And I think Peru, by and large, and granted there's always exceptions, there's always extremes, even here in Peru, but by and large, I think Peru does a very good job at keeping the main thing, and also being very comfortable with keeping church simple. Remembering that it's not about a giant stage projection or the pastor having, just that right amount of cool wardrobe on or anything like that, but just really staying focused on the Bible and on God. Also, I think the Peruvian church, by and large, has the leg up on the United States church in the sense of community. And I think that Peru has a head start on that because the culture is much more centered on community and family to begin with. But I do think that the Peruvian church does a better job, by and large, about making sure that the congregation knows that it's not about coming one time on Sunday, but this is a family that is being built. This is a community that is here for each other 7 days of the week, 24/7, not just Sundays for 2 hours and 1 or 2 hours throughout the week. And I think this is something that God is teaching probably every church around most of the world right now, as we all have gone digital and most of us have lost permission to go into our church buildings. It's been a good reminder for everyone that it should never have been about the building, that it's about God, His Word, and then the people. And I think while Peru might have, in many cases, the upper leg, the churches in Peru still needed that lesson. It was a very hardcore object lesson that God has given us. But from everything I've seen online and all the churches that I've seen and talking to different pastors and other church leaders, it seems like everyone has this kind of seized the moment and is doing a really good job about reaching out in creative ways via technology in this time that we are not allowed to congregate. And I think this is a really good lesson for all the churches to be learning right now. And my hope and prayer is that we remember it 4 months out from the corona crisis. Again, if you have questions, please send them my way, cmfry427@gmail.com, or via Facebook and Instagram, Chris and Paula Fry, The View from Peru. Also, if you wouldn't mind liking or following however you are listening to this podcast, and also sharing it with a friend or a family member who is either interested in Peru or missions or something along those lines. All the data shows that the best way for a podcast to grow is through word of mouth, is through you sharing it. And it's not that I want this podcast to become huge and super well known or whatever. It's more that this is one of the best mediums I know how to help people pray for Peru and for missionaries. And this is something I'm trying to do to glorify God. And so I want more people praying for the missionaries they already know. And I want more people praying for Peru. So the more people that hear this, the more people hopefully will be praying. Praying that the students at my school get saved. Praying for our church, Iglesia Nueva Vida. Praying for the missionaries that we will be hearing from and other ministry leaders here in Peru that we'll be interviewing on this podcast. And also praying for the missionaries that your church already knows or that you're already in contact with. If the Lord has placed it on your heart to support Paola and me with either a single or monthly monetary gift, I have some instructions below in the show notes, as well as links to our Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube channels. So if the Lord has placed it on your heart to give us a monetary gift, please go to www.nix.org/donate- and choose Donate Now. Then go to Staff Support and then put in our staff project number, which is 004017. Again, that is 004017. And we would really appreciate your help financially, but more importantly, we would really appreciate your prayers. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that this has been of some sort of spiritual benefit to you and that it has also glorified God in some way. Next week, please come back as we have ready for you guys a podcast about missionary kids. And I have a lot of really cool clips from not just myself, but from other missionary kids telling their stories. So please tune in next week to listen for that. Thank you so much. And please don't forget to like, subscribe, and pray for Peru.